It is two rules that I normally have when I give a shiur, and I'm breaking both of them tonight. Rule number one is that I never like to come late to a shiur. Shiur is called for a certain time. You have to respect the people that they're on time. And today I'm late. And we're not going to go through that whole story because we're going to take the time from the shiur about the delay. The second rule in the shiur is I try not to do the same shiur twice. Because even though there's things that you can learn again and again, but somebody already heard the shiur, doesn't want to hear it again. But this particular shiur, but the subject matter, I don't mind doing 10 times, 11 times, 20 times, 1,000 times. Because the subject matter that we're talking about is about shiur b'Shabbos, Refuah b'Shabbos, curing pikuach nefesh, curing people on Shabbos. And why am I saying I don't mind doing it many, many times? Because there's a famous halacha, brought on Yerushalmi, brought on halacha, and the Rebbe quoted it many times when it came to the situation in Eretz Yisrael about giving away land, that when it comes to questions about pikuach nefesh, hashoyel harei zeh shofech damim. If somebody asks shilas about it, he's considered a murderer. But, well, wait, I have to ask the Rav first. No, don't worry, the guy's dying, it's fine, but to get hold of the Rav, no, that's not my Rav, let me find a better Rav. And Hanishal, the person who's being asked, he's also Magunna, he's also doing the wrong thing. Now, the person who asks, I understand he's doing wrong. There's a case of Pekuach Nefesh, what are you asking Shilas? Go take him to the hospital immediately, call out Salah. But the rabbi is being asked, what did he do wrong? Why is he being told off? And the answer to that is because he should have taught publicly this halacha. The rabbi is guilty because he hasn't educated his community. So there's one area I feel, doesn't matter how many times I'll give the shiur on this topic, and it might not be the same exact shiur, it might be slightly differently, but the general theme of giving a shiur on the topic of pikuach nefesh on Shabbos is important to repeat it again and again and again. If you don't mind, I don't mind if you don't mind, unless it's something about that you don't understand what I said. If there's a question, I'd rather leave it till later because till I finish. If it's pikuach nefesh right now, then I'll stop the shiur.
The underlying problem is everything is so hazy.
I'm trying to give a shiur. I'm trying to give a shiur to clarify, but I won't be able if I get interruptions. So let me finish, please. Okay. If after the shiur something which is not clear, let me know, and we'll take from there. Now, obviously, there is such a thing about asking questions about pikuach nefesh. Clearly, Shulchan Aruch is full of a range of different halachas. If it would be that simple, we wouldn't have to have a shiur. We just say, don't ask questions. Everything is permitted and finished. And there are svarim which were written, responsa, shalos shuvas svarim, shut, which were written about questions about pikuach nefesh. Clearly, that's the case. So obviously, we have to qualify that. When we say that questions about pikuach nefesh are not supposed to be asked, number one, that's only something which is bohol, with a sense of urgency. So in other words, something that could wait until tomorrow, nothing will happen. Obviously, it doesn't mean you can't ask a shayla. It means if there's an urgent situation right now that you're facing, and if chas v'shalom you don't do anything, it might create a pikuach nefesh situation. Number one. Number two, if you don't even know if it's a pikuach nefesh situation, because you're confused, you don't even understand. Yeah, obviously, you're allowed to ask a question. You don't know is really having a toothache pikuach nefesh? I don't know. Let me ask a question. So the principle that we said about not asking questions is about the general principle, and of course, the specifics as well. If a person violates Shabbos, violated Shabbos due to a pikuach nefesh situation, and he finds out that really it wasn't necessary, the halach is he doesn't need a kapara, he doesn't need atonement, he did the right thing. There's a fascinating story that happened in Eretz Yisrael, and it gets to what I think you started touching on. What's the classification of pikuach nefesh? And it is not so simple, and we're going to go through a few different scenarios. But I love the story because it really illustrates the point of how do we classify pikuach nefesh. It was a story in Eretz Yisrael. There was a kid, more correctly a bacher, that disappeared and didn't come home Friday. Friday is a Shabbos off. In Eretz Yisrael, it's called Shabbat Chuvsha, Shabbos off. And the boy would normally come home on Friday. He didn't come home. Now, I don't know if a bacher doesn't come home, that's called pikuach nefesh. Maybe when he comes home, it might be pikuach nefesh. Because bachrim often don't show up when they say they're going to show up. But there was some level of concern. It's a Friday. Okay, let's go check. We'll go to the dorm. They came to the dorm, and they discovered, no, he left the dorm. He left. There you go, whatever. I think they have off on Thursday, whatever it is. So the dorm is not an option. He's not in the dorm. He's not at home. He's not in yeshiva sitting and learning either. So it might not be in the dorm. Maybe he's in the zal. Maybe it's a medrash. No. Now, another favorite pastime of Bachar, in particular in Israel, is Hafganas. Hafganas is protesting, demonstrations. And some Bachar, for some reason, think that that's much more interesting than sitting and learning. And the rule of thumb in Israel is, first we make the protest, then we discover what it's about. Then we'll decide, we'll find the theme. They say that all the signs in Meir Sharm already printed. Mechan Imretzes. How do you say Mechan Imretzes in English? Strong condemnation. We don't know yet who or what, but we have the sign. We'll just add later the details. That's how the joke goes. So this particular Bachar, there was a Hafgana that took place, and they thought maybe he's one of those that protest, and Israeli police and Bachram have this very interesting love-hate relationship, and Bachram end up sometimes afterwards in jail. It's an experience. It's a part of the experience of going to Eretz Yisrael. You also have to have a night in the jail. And some of the wealthy people have this theory that they say jail is an investment. If you learn the system very well, you know that if you cheat X, you end up in jail for half a year, but it's worth it because eventually you come out. And eventually, in order to gain wealth, that's part of the process you have to do. Anyhow, that's some of these gvirim have this attitude. It's like there was a guy over here in Kranitz that said that he found an expensive parking. It was a couple $100 because it was a ticket. Okay, but it's parking. Yeah, some people have that attitude. So the thought was maybe this Bachar was one of those that have this interesting Bachar type of attitude, and maybe it was by this protest, and maybe because it was a protest, a couple of Bachar were taken in. So there's a prison called Migrash Harusim, I think I'm pronouncing it correctly, and that's a favorite place where Bachar end up for a night occasionally. And so they want to check, maybe he's there. No, but he wasn't there. Okay, so not in yeshiva, not in the dorm, not home, not Migrash Harusim, that's called disappearing. So do we put up a missing sign? Well, it's, by the way, not only a question which involves Chil Shabbos that the Rav has to contend with. Shmira, Hatzalah, Chaverim, police have this question often. They don't do it. As soon as someone says, my son didn't come home from the bus today, he's 5 minutes past, that very, very nervous mother, that the bus is a minute late, it's like, pikuach nefesh. So it calls up the police not going to do anything. Because it's normal people come late. There's a certain, anyhow, but this is getting a bit more. They went to ask a certain Rav in Eretz Yisrael, not alive anymore, I'm not going to mention his name. And the Rav said, a search team, a rescue team. Chil Shabbos, how do you know something went wrong with the kid? It's a Bachar, it's not a kid. And if you can get a rescue team, who's going to find him? And he was dismissed of the whole thing. They went to ask another Rav, Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, and Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach said, no, Chil Shabbos, Deraisa, Alidei Yisrael, get Jewish people, Chal Shabbos, don't do a shinui, don't do anything, do straight for Chil Shabbos, no problem. This is a real Pikuach Nefesh Torah. Kid is missing. So they got a search team and a rescue team. What ended up happening in the end was he actually was in jail, and they just didn't notice he was on the list. And he was having that fun experience of joining the protest, and he was there for the night. Anyhow, so somebody went to inform Shlomo Zalman that the Bachar was found. Went to Sha'arei Chesed, which is the neighborhood where Shlomo Zalman was, and he told him the Bachar was found. Shlomo Zalman, was thankful for the good news, but then he said to pass on a message to the father, don't worry, it wasn't a Chil Shabbos, it was a mitzvah. He thought the father's going to think that obviously this is an indication that the first Rav was right. And he's going to feel guilty that he was involved in Chil Shabbos. He says, no, don't get the wrong message. It wasn't Chil Shabbos. It was a good thing what you did. Okay, he happened to be, there was no problem. He wasn't missing. And so this brings to light this particular story, and I could share you many stories. It brings to light something which, in other words, about trying to get the clarity of what's Pikuach Nefesh and what's not. And we'll talk a bit about this soon. Being extra pious and saying, no, I don't want to be Mechal Shabbos is referred to as a Chassidus Shal Shtus. I guess a person could be a Chassid and a Shaita simultaneously. There's a word from Rabbi Braun that he said the person could be a tzaddik and a shaita. He says, how do we know? It could be a tzaddik shaita. Because it says in the Gemara that before a person's neshama comes down to this world, they decide in advance, the Malach brings to Hashem the future child, Tippa, and Hashem decides in advance if he's going to be rich or poor, if it's going to be smart or stupid. Tzaddik v'rasha lo come. They don't decide in advance if he's going to be a tzaddik or a rasha. Who decides that? You have free choice. So he says, so it's possible that a person was deciding that he's going to be a shaita. But in his free choice, he chose to be a tzaddik. So you see, you can have a tzaddik shaita. But you definitely can have a chassid shaita. We have that concept. And a classical example of a chassid shaita is a pikuach nefesh. Shabbos. No, I know you're allowed to be Michal Shabbos, but I'm extra from. I have to share with you a story. I'm sorry. There might be a lot of stories of him. Maybe the stories are better than the shiur, the anecdotes. I was years ago. This is not in Crown Heights, so don't try to guess who this was. I was in a shul, and there was a person. It was one of the shuls. They don't have a balkoy, a regular balkoy, and they split, different aliyahs amongst different people. And the first person got the first, somebody whose job was to learn the first aliyah on Shabbos in shul, and he was also a kohen, and he also got that aliyah also. And he's not the first time he's learning. Okay, he's learning maybe a bit slower than everybody else is learning, but okay, he's learning. Something was wrong the way he was learning it. It looked like something was wrong with the guy. He finished off the laning in like, I don't remember now if he was speeding too much or his voice came out very disturbed, very blurry, very slurred voice. And he said the brachas after the Torah, also like, and then he just conked down and fell on the floor. And the floor, there was no Hatzalah in this place. At that stage, they didn't yet have the concept of Hatzalah. But they went to call someone in the shul, on the nearby shul, say, hey, yeah, call the ambulance. And they found that they revived him, whatever. And no, he's not going in ambulance on Shabbos. He's not going in ambulance on Shabbos. He said, yeah, he was, they got him, he's still extremely weak. He was like, they picked him up and they brought him on a chair or something. We have to go into ambulance because it's a concern over here. It's an older person. No, he's not going to ambulance. They tried telling him, you're wrong. And then bring in the big guns. They asked me, the Rav should come and tell him that you should go. So I came to them and said, Api halacha, you're mechuyev to go in the ambulance on Shabbos. And if you need, I'll come along with you. Because if that's going to convince him, that's what you're supposed to do. He didn't want to listen to me. And now, in the end, I don't know exactly what happened, but in the end, he ended up going to the hospital. They checked him out, and they sent him home. I see Shabbos afternoon, he's back in shul. Now, the hospital is quite a long distance from the shul. And he's not the type of guy that could, under regular circumstances, do that walk. And now that he had this story that happened to him, I said, how'd he get back? He said, got a car. I said, what? Isn't there something that if you let it go back or something? I said, look at this. Look at a person's priorities are all messed up. When it comes to going to the hospital on Shabbos, when he's absolutely obligated to go to the hospital, no, that he wouldn't do, because he's not going to be Michal Shabbos. But now when he's stuck in a hospital, it's very unpleasant. You have to go back. It's fine. It's towards the end of Shabbos. He can stay there another hour. It's not, he's a difficult condition. He can't be there. On that, all of a sudden, yeah, sure, you got to go back. And yeah, he should go back, shouldn't go back. I'm like, that's another whole subject about going back. I don't want to go into that right now. I'm just bringing out people can sometimes have this chassidish shtus and their priorities all in the wrong way. So how do we define a situation of sakana, of pikuach nefesh? My grandmother, maybe not my grandmother, your grandmother, someone's grandmother, will definitely say that if you don't go out with a sweater, you're going to catch a cold. And if you're going to catch a cold, you knows what's going to happen to you. And you might end up in the hospital, those real worrying grandmothers. So buying a sweater on Shabbos is an obligation. It's pikuach nefesh. Maybe you will have to sew a sweater. There are people that over here in America in the 30s and 40s, in the early 1900s, said you have to work on Shabbos. Because if you don't work on Shabbos, you won't have a job. People used to get pink slips. Anybody over here know still what pink slips are? Basically, you fire a guy from his job. Came Shabbos, guy didn't show up to work. Next week, Sunday didn't have to go to work. But Shabbos, he had to go to work. Next week, Monday, you show up to work, you get a pink slip, don't come back again. The people didn't have food for their kids. So where do you draw the line? And that's when we're talking about an individual. When we start talking about in a community, start talking about in a country, if Eretz Yisrael would run totally al pi Torah, and they would have to define now what you're allowed to do on Shabbos, what you're not allowed to do on Shabbos. So, are we allowed to produce weapons on Shabbos? Is the Mossad allowed to do their whatever activities they do on Shabbos? Are you allowed to produce a vaccine on Shabbos? Let's say there's a pandemic, and there's a rush against the clock to get a vaccine out. Now, it's going to be saving many, many people without going into the sugi vaccines right now. She's going to say as an example. So, can I sit in the lab and produce vaccines? How far do you stretch this? So, the first rule is, again, there's a lot of rules, and again, I can't cover everything, that it has to be something which is sakana, is shchiach. It's common that there'll be a danger. There are a lot of conditions that something could go wrong. A lot of conditions, but it's not common. Now I don't want to go now to if we want to remember back the arguments that happened during COVID. How serious is it, right? Clearly, in Pesach time, 2 years ago, we were unfortunate. When we say halacha, we can't talk fancy language. We have to say things the way they are. Normally, we're very careful in our language, but we're talking halacha. We have to be very clear. We're deaths. Usually, we'll say opposite of life. They were deaths. Unfortunately, every single day, many of them. So clearly, that's sakana, right? Then there were the arguments. It's real sakana. It's not real sakana. Obviously, it's sakana all the way through. It's just a question of what the level of sakana is. So suddenly, it's common that it's sakana. What do I mean common? The expression in Pesachim is that if it's echad me'elef doesn't necessarily mean a number. It's an expression. 1 in 1,000. Meaning it's just so rare, just so uncommon, nothing ever happens. Then, like the sweater case, that's not called pikuach nefesh. That, by the way, that expression is used in both ways. Rabbi Kiva says, if it's echad me'elef, it's not a sakana. And the Maggid Mishnah writes, so echad me'elef it's not a science, it's not an exact number, it's a concept. Echad me'elef could be used, like I said, the Maggid Mishnah writes, that a yoldus, a woman that's giving birth on Shabbos, it's considered pikuach nefesh. So we're allowed to do everything for a yoldus. But there's a very unusual halacha when it comes to a yoldus, a woman giving birth, that everything that's done has to be done with a shiur. So you don't do it in the normal fashion. Wherever you can. Wherever you could do a shiur, we do a shiur. Under normal circumstances of pikuach nefesh, it's totally not so simple. In fact, the mainstream view is you shouldn't do a shiur. When a person's in a state of, when you're talking about being mechal Shabbos pikuach nefesh, do malacha kedarka, do a regular malacha, mechal Shabbos properly. When it comes to a yoldus, do a shiur. So the Maggid Mishnah, why should he do a shiur by a yoldus? So he says because echad me'elef meisamach masleda. It's not normal that something goes wrong with birth. Most women, and that's in those days, in the incidence of women dying at childbirth was much higher. And he still says, echad, it's darkei shel olam. Childbirth is part of the normal structure of the world. Hospitals like to make everything into a sickness. And that's why a lot of people don't like hospitals. There's reasons why they do that. But childbirth is not a sickness. Childbirth is a natural course of events that has happened since the beginning of time. It doesn't require necessarily a doctor or a hospital. That's why a lot of people push for home births, correctly or incorrectly. But I'm just mentioning that school of thought. Because the process of childbirth is a natural process. It might not be safe necessarily to do a home birth or whatever. We can discuss that, but that's not the subject matter right now. Since this is tivoi shel olam, it's not necessarily something that requires involvement. It's not necessarily a dangerous thing. Therefore, you're allowed to be mechal Shabbos with a shiur. But what you do see clearly from the Maggid Mishnah, it's still called sakanas nefeshos. Even though it has a low instance which he calls echad me'elef. But it's still considered risky. Childbirth has some level of risk attached to it. It might not be the same as other situations of the nefashos. So the problem here is, are we supposed to get a statistician with us? And every single time we confront a situation on Shabbos, call a statistician and work out what are the numbers, what are the chances. It makes it extremely difficult to operate that way. Never mind that halacha in general doesn't really recognize statistics. It's not, halacha is not, and statistics don't necessarily go together. And the statistics are so unclear, like take COVID, everybody became a Talmud Chacham. And they know exactly every single study that comes out. But these studies are out about every single subject under the sun. Just COVID scared us so much, and therefore people keep on reading the news. So it depends. In COVID, we discovered it depends on the race. Yeah. And on the obesity. And on the age. And the type of food. And 200 other different factors. And tomorrow we'll find that the factors we got them wrong slightly differently. Yeah. And then based on their blood type, and based on this, and based on that. So we can't even do normal statistics over here, right? And no one is expected to become a mathematician and a statistician for the determined pikuach nefesh. So we need to have a better definition to determine how do I, the layperson, know if it's pikuach nefesh or not. I understand something which is very uncommon, very rare, I understand. Things that are common, I understand also. The question is, of course, about those middle of the road situations. Sorry? So that's clear, right? Right. So I'm saying, but there are cases that we're not clear about. So the Shlomo Zalman says, and a typical Yiddish mama is sitting on Shabbos, and the kid is complaining about something, go to the hospital, shouldn't go to the hospital. By the way, we asked that question during the Dubikosa. Not only question we ask on Shabbos. Should I go to the hospital? Should I not go? Should I call out Salah? Should I not call out Salah? Should I? Is it worth it? Should I call out Salah? Should I bother out Salah? Should I go to the doctor, make a doctor's appointment? Should I not make a doctor's appointment? Nobody likes making a doctor's appointment because that means a full day of take off a day of work. Because you have to wait in the office for a full day and you only get to be seen a day later, right? So go to the hospital, that's a week off work, just to check you until you know everything is fine, right? So nobody likes to go to the hospital. It's not a very, very pleasant place to go. So you consider it, you think about it. Comes Shabbos, on top of your inconvenience, is something called Chil Shabbos. Yeah, it's an important concept called Chil Shabbos. So Rabbi Zalman gives a definition, Rabbi Zalman Auerbach, which is a very reasonable definition. I haven't seen this definition earlier, but it's which is strange because the question, what's pikuach nefesh, should have been asked earlier. And he says, Kol davar shahanoshim nivholim olav b'choil. Anything that people go into panic during the weekday, if it's normal that people panic, and I understand some people panic about everything, we're not talking about those kind of people. Some people don't panic about anything, and we're not talking about them either. We're talking about some which is normal, that people go into a state of panic, emergency. If it's considered an emergency, if there's a sense of urgency, that's called pikuach nefesh. If during the week, that's how people react. So to use an example, and actually it's connected with vaccines, the Noida Yehuda, everybody must have heard of the Noida Yehuda. They had a Talmud called the Tshuva Me'ava. Tshuva Me'ava is not only something that we do, but it's also the name of a book. The Tshuva Me'ava, I have to mention something interesting. The Noida Yehuda is actually the first person that came up with the idea. He was the first, but he was one of the first with the shiur. It's today known as shiur Chazon Ish. In every single thing in measurements, we have the regular shiur and we have the big shiur, the Chazon Ish shiur. I don't know why the Chazon Ish is blamed for it. It's really the Noida Yehuda that came with that idea. He wrote it not in the Sefer Noida Yehuda, he wrote it in the Sefer Tzlach. He wrote that he did his calculations and the measurements of Chazal seemed to be off. And then based on these calculations, all our eggs became smaller. And therefore we have to double everything. That's basically the premise. And then with this Talmud, the Tshuva Me'ava writes, even though he's a big Talmud of the Noida Yehuda, he says that my Rebbe seems to be that he was a bit too tall. He is taller than the average person. And then his measurements are all off and everything is back as normal. He did measurements with his hand, with his arm, yeah, but he was a bit off. Anyhow, so the Tshuva Me'ava writes about developing a vaccine, about getting a vaccine on Shabbos. Now, the vaccines they're talking about in those days are not the vaccines we're talking about today. I'm not about the COVID vaccine. They're not the vaccines that we know from 40 years ago either. But at that time, there was all the discussion that we have today, the concept, the principles already discussed in Poskim. There was a sickness called poking. Poking is what we know as chickenpox. And it was dangerous in those days. And the Shalor already writes about pucking, and he writes about kids getting pucking and what you have to do with them. You have to take them out of the city, and people have to be very careful, and then people that are in danger of their kids' lives and don't run away from town, all that kind of stuff. So the Tshuva writes about getting a vaccine, whatever the vaccine was then, in the primitive conditions of those days, on Shabbos, because it's dangerous. And he says, no. There's no rush. You can get it after Shabbos. It's something that you got to do, but you don't have to do it today. So the idea of what I mentioned before in Shlomo Zalman, you already see in the Buddha student, that principle. You don't have to right now. You know, you go to a doctor, you sometimes you like the urgent care or the clinic is closed on Sunday, you know that concept? What does everybody do on Sundays? Okay, they wait till Monday. You go at the end of the week. The hospitals have operate on lesser amount of staff. End of the year. I was stuck. My mazel. I had a kid on Shabbos. In the hospital with one of my kids. I can't remember now what happened. I mean, he fell. Something happened. Yeah, and they were operating a very low because it was Kratz New Year. Come on, that's more important than Nefesh, clearly. So everybody's on vacation and whatever. Okay, we'll manage. And all the urgent surgeries get pushed off because they're not so urgent. You know, in the hospitals have a system. Triage. So you come inside and you get assessed. You're not really that important. Your life expectancy is 3 days. This guy is 2 hours, right? So and you're screaming in pain. They're used to pain. It doesn't mean anything over there. Never. And they can be sitting and chatting on the phone also. I mean, they're human. I mean, they have to operate normally. So nothing is sometimes, depending on circumstance, not everything is necessarily urgent. Like I said before, you wouldn't necessarily go to the hospital even during the week. And you would say, you know what, let us wait a night. I don't know if I want to go to the hospital. Maybe we should wait a night and see if it's tomorrow morning. It's not the problem. You'll call your local doctor, they'll tell you. I wouldn't rush to go to the hospital. I think you should go to the hospital. There's no rush. You can wait until tomorrow. I had a condition with a child right after his bris. One of my kids. And there was breathing issues. The baby after the bris. For some odd reason, Hashem, Hashgacha Pratis, they didn't ask me any questions in the hospital about Metzitza B'Peh, because everything is Metzitza B'Peh's fault. I'm sure you know that, right? So, and we didn't have that problem. Literally the day after the bris. Anyhow, I went to a doctor. Doctor said, this is a concern. It was Friday. And the doctor says, come check him in a few hours, see how his breathing is, come back to me. And he wanted me to come back to him a few times over Shabbos. Keep on reporting to him his pulse and his etc. Anyhow, he says, no, you don't have to go into the hospital. No, it's fine, you could stay. Matzah Shabbos, he wanted me to come see him. He got with the baby, and he says, get to the hospital immediately. And then he tells me like this, really? You should have gone to the hospital on Shabbos also. I broke all the rules in the book for you, but I'm not prepared to take it any further. What did he mean? He says, I know what it's like to be in the hospital over Shabbos, but I know I have a bit of wiggle room. I could wait till after Shabbos, and it is, but now, no, there's no way. I can't take that on my achrais, you to be out of the hospital for so long, and this condition is still continuing, and it's going up. I don't remember now when up, went down. I don't remember now what the details were. So yeah, the doctor made an assessment. He made a calculated assessment, taking into account the what it means to be in the hospital over Shabbos, taking into account the level of urgency of the child, and he said, "Listen, in this case, yeah, there's a bit room, but now he's going to lose his license if he does this any further, right?" So that goes back to the point that we're talking about. What's the level of urgency? Is it something that's urgent? The second thing is, and that the Noidi Behuda, the teacher of the Tshuva Me'ava, writes, the one rule about Pekuach Nefesh is that it has to be Chayil Lefaneinu. The person that we're dealing with, there's an existing individual who is not well. We don't contend with futuristic potential situations that might happen. So, case in point, the case that's addressed in Poskim, a Kohen wants to go learn medicine. Learning medicine involves defiling the Kedusha of a Kohen by dealing with dead bodies. Don't know if that's how it's done today also. If it has to be done that way, it definitely is done that way. But definitely in those days, that was the must. There's no other way to do it. And the Kohen says, Pikuach Nefesh. He's going to become a doctor. You know how many lives he's going to save? And the Buddha says, no. Pikuach Nefesh is when there's an existing situation of Pikuach Nefesh. Not because if you do this one day, you'll be able to save lives. So now, although that's a true principle, and therefore the grandmother's sweater principle, the sweater rule does not apply. A sweater is not Pikuach Nefesh, because if you don't wear, ifs and buts and whens, but that rule is too simplistic. Because if there's let's say, take a raging pandemic in town, I'm giving an extreme example, and everybody in the block already went to another world. Now, he's perfectly healthy. But because there's a raging pandemic, there's a serious risk. Every house around them, it's reached, right? They'll say, no, I'm not. I'm perfectly fine. I'm not a chayla. I can't do something to prevent things, chil Shabbos. Now, that would be ridiculous to say that, right? I'm going to give you an extreme example. Clearly, that's a general definition. In things that are extremely common, or in a large city, Hatzalah knows that in a large city, there is going to be inevitably a case of Pikuach Nefesh on Shabbos. They don't have to say, oh, unless I know the person that's already sick in a state of Sakanas Nefashos, I'm allowed to be Mechal Shabbos. They can also say, there's definitely going to be this Shabbos because although it's something about the future, what I'm saying is a theoretical point, because the reality is that in every large city, there are people that are currently already not well in a state of Sakanas Nefashos. My body is just buy some tissues there. Hospitals have to do systems, fix up, have to review their systems, check the mechanism of all the machines and all of that, right? So they know this is going to fail if we don't, refresh the system, whatever it is, whatever they have to do over there. So again, it's theoretical as hospitals have cholim lefaneinu right then and there. But even if they wouldn't, when you're dealing with large scale, big numbers, you don't only have to work on cholim lefaneinu. If it's extremely common and realistic, that's relevant, then that has to be taken into account. Same thing applies in countries, like I said, in Eretz Yisrael. If they would operate al pi Torah, then they wouldn't be able to say, listen, unless we know of a risk, right now there's an actual risk coming from Saudi Arabia and from Iran. And no, they know that under normal circumstances, this is what has to happen. And therefore those things have to be taken into account. The rule of thumb is, when in doubt, you err on the side of yes, chil Shabbos. Safik nefashos lahakol. When it comes to a doubt about people's lives, we're lenient in the sense of here, meaning lenient about chil Shabbos, or in any other matter of Torah for that matter, or kashrus, whatever it is. Any doubt, take the lenient side. But there's a proviso here. The proviso is it has to be a refuah yedua or al pi mumcha. Chil Shabbos may be done if it's a well-known treatment, or this is what an expert is advising you to do. In other words, I can't just come up with something and say that if you take garlic, I know from my great-grandmother who heard from the neighbor in town in Hungary, that if you take garlic, you mix it into the soup, and then you put it on top of Laron Kodesh, you put it around your head 7 times, and then you step on it, whatever. That's good for this and this sickness. You can't do that, and because of that, do chil Shabbos. That has to be the full yedah. That's the klal that's brought down in all Pesachim. Fragt the Pri Megadim, starke Shaila. Pri Megadim asks the question: why does it have to be refuah yedua, a well-known treatment? Safik pikuach nefashos lahakol. Any doubt about pikuach nefesh? Some might work, it might not work. Who cares? Try it. Safik pikuach nefesh. It's a very strong question. There's a number of beautiful answers to this question, but I want to tell the real answer. This is a question a lot of people deal with. One of the answers they give is, that when it says Refuah Yedua Al Pi Mumcha is not talking about dealing with a Chayla Sheyesh Beisakana. It's talking about a Chayla She'en Beisakana. It's talking about a non-dangerous situation. We're going to be talking about that soon. There's different levels of Refuah on Shabbos. I've been talking all along only about Chayla Sheyesh Beisakana. You're allowed to be Mechal Shabbos, Bidder, so with your hands, you yourself, then it's withdraw a Yid, etc. So some people want to say this principle of Refuah Yedua Al Pi Mumcha does not apply to Chayla Sheyesh Beisakana, but that's not correct. It's actually not correct. It's a nice theory, but it's not correct. If you look up in the sources, it's clearly talking about Chayla Sheyesh Beisakana, clearly talking about a state with his Mamash Sakanas Nefashos, and it still says you're only allowed to be Mechal Shabbos only if it's a well-known treatment. And the answer is very simple. If you look at the original source where this was talking about, the original source is actually not even in Hilchos Shabbos. The original source is in Hilchos Kashrus. That comes from Aram Rothenberg. It's quoted again in so many different places, in so many different situations. But the first source that I believe that we know of is Aram Rothenberg, one of the early Rishonim Poskim, writes about treating a sickness by giving the person burnt sheretz sarf, taking some type of creepy crawly, some type of bug, burning it, and that's a kind of treatment. And he says you can't do that because it's not a Refuah Yedua and it's not Al Pi Mumcha. What am I taking from there? It doesn't mean that they have to know already this is going to work. It means there's some things that don't even enter the range of suffix. Not because some idiot in the street made up something that lets it go into the range of suffix. If I know that something is, this is in the range of normal, let's put it that way, I can't tell you for sure it's going to work. Yeah, of course you're allowed to do that. Shlomo Zalman writes, for example, he says when doctors do trial medicines, it's on trial right now. It hasn't yet been approved. It's on trial. And they sometimes even give you a chance, if you want, you could be part of their study. And then you get the medicine for free. You might get a couple of dollars too. So are you allowed to use that to be Mechal Shabbos? So Shlomo Zalman says that's not called not Refuah Yedua. That's being done by professional doctors, by experts. However, they haven't tested it yet. They didn't stop and say something based on nothing. There's a theory, there's a principle, it's been studied, it's been analyzed. However, we don't know yet how it's going to work in action. So again, when we're saying it has to be the Refuah Yedua, we mean to say to exclude sheretz sarif, some burned sheretz, which it's not a hakim chaynik, right? It doesn't have to be for sure that it's going to work. Something which was hash'ara ba'alma, it was stamina. So, in my evaluation, I decided, or stam eitz shel idiotis, simpletons. Simpletons gave advice, but they're not muchim, they're not professionals. But something which is done by professionals, or something which is not just hash'ara, we see how it works. That's a whole different story. Who should be Mechal Shabbos? Anyone. Mitzvah begadol. The greater the person is, the more mitzvah he should do it. Famous story of the Alter Rebbe. Everybody knows the story. Even though there was a time when no one knew the story. The Rebbe said that he was told the story in secret. And he was told that this is a story that we don't repeat. And the Rebbe said, but my father, when he told me this story, he knew that I'm the type of person, if you tell me a story, I'm not going to hold it for myself, I'm going to pass it on. And the Rebbe spoke about the story so many times. It's something which was one of the guiding principles of the Rebbe, we may say. That Alter Rebbe went on Yom Kippur, during the Kol Nidre, and he went outside of town, and he chopped wood, and he cooked up a soup for a woman that just gave birth. So according to the story, when Alter Rebbe was asked, you couldn't find anybody else to do this? Alter Rebbe said, mitzvah begadol. And I couldn't find anybody greater than me. That's Alter Rebbe's response. So I was once in a situation, I don't remember what, I'm trying to remember the details. And there was I was by a Rav, I'm remembering now. And there was I don't remember what the condition was. It was Shabbos, something happened to someone. Again, a place where there's no Atzala, we had to flag down a car, literally flag down a taxi, call an ambulance, it's going to take even longer. And I was like reluctant. And the Rav says, I'll do it. So, I'll do it. He went out, and the Rav himself went out, stood in the street, and he's trying to flag down the car. Like, oh, I'm not looking for someone else to do this. Some people think that it's better that the person who is not well should do it himself. There's nothing true about that. There's no difference if he does it himself or someone else does. There's really absolutely no difference. The question sometimes happens, okay, you're allowed to be Mechal Shabbos, but sometimes you can avoid Chil Shabbos, but it's very, very unpleasant. Yeah, I could call Hatzalah. That's going to involve me being Mechal Shabbos and Hatzalah being Mechal Shabbos. Or have a neighbor. And I don't have to make the phone call. Have a neighbor next door. Okay, so it'll be somebody driving still, but it won't be a phone call. And that's all has to make one phone call, and then they have to put it into the system, and then have to drive, and have to buy my next door neighbor. But it's 2:00 in the morning. So I could just go and wake up my neighbor. Do I have to do that? I really feel bad doing this to my neighbor at 2:00 in the morning. And this question can be asked in so many different ways. Either one. You can ask the question either way. A guy makes it even better. So now I can wake up the guy's neighbor, and like this will be only a guy be Mechal Shabbos. Or even see Yiddish neighbor, at least it will prevent a phone call. I'll give you another scenario. This could come in some different scenarios, but there's something that could be done, but it's not the normal way of doing things. There's a siddur, an old siddur called Siddur Minchas Yerushalayim. It's a certain kind of siddur, and it has halachas in it. One of the Rabbanim that gave haskama to that siddur wrote that he noticed in the siddur it says that if there's electric wires that are exposed, which they could be dangerous, somebody touches them, they could be electrocuted, you're allowed to be Mechal Shabbos to call the electric company to take care of it. This was written in Eretz Yisrael. So one of the Rabbanim at the time, has been many years ago already, said, what do you mean? Why should we go call electric company? Stand there and just stop people from touching it. We stand there holding our Shabbos and say, alert, danger, electric. Is that what you have to do? Or can you go call Bezik? Bezik is a phone company. What's the electric company? What's the difference? So how far do you take this? It is accepted amongst Paiskim. No, I once spoke to my brother about this. He brought me a beautiful raya and Alter Rebbe Shechanarech to prove this point also. You're not mechuyev to go stand on guard the entire Shabbos in order that you shouldn't have to go call Hatzalah or call the electric company. No. What you do have to do is, now the neighbor, if the neighbor is up, yeah, he has an obligation to go take care of the problem, but you have no obligation to wake up the neighbor. If it's something which is, in other words, you can go and take your wife and kids because your wife and your kids, you have an obligation for them, you have a financial obligation for them, then yes, you have to make sure that it happens. And you shouldn't say, well, I'm allowed to be Mechal Shabbos, let me call that soul, and do some extra malacha. But otherwise, if it's something that you can't do, you don't have to go and wake up a neighbor, you don't have to do that. So I'll give you another example. The halacha is that if somebody is not well, stuck on nefashos, you're allowed to even turn on a light for them on Shabbos. Even, by the way, not in order to know what to do for them, to see what to do. Because the person himself will feel more comfortable. There's a light because he'll know that you're doing a good job. You can see what you're doing. The halacha is even for a blind person this can be done. Because it's a calming effect. The person knows that everything is done properly. There's lights people can see. In those days, it was candles we're talking about. So it's a certain calming thing. Now, what if you have a case that I could actually go get a candle for my neighbor? Today's day and age would be getting a battery operated, because a plugged-in thing you can't get. You can get a battery operated flashlight and have to go turn on a light. So again, we have to go wake up the neighbor, go to the house, 2:00 in the morning. No, you don't have to. You let it go, just turn on the light. There are really two aspects to this whole halacha of Refuah on Shabbos. There are many aspects, but two key aspects. I don't know if in our shiur we could deal with both of them. One is the idea of medicine on Shabbos, which is, we're not pikuach nefesh stuff, none of that sakana stuff. It's day-to-day stuff. You're allowed to take this on Shabbos, like take that on Shabbos. And the other area is when are you allowed to go be Mechal Shabbos? Really, I would divide in these two general categories. They're both found in the same exact simon in Shulchan Aruch, which is this simon which I encourage everyone. I don't know to what extent you've learned in the classes over here, but I encourage everybody to get a good knowledge of this simon in Shulchan Aruch, simon Shin Chav Ches. For some odd reason, Shin Chav Ches is shachach, means forget. And it's something you should remember. Maybe that's because people tend to forget these things. Half of it is about medication on Shabbos. Okay, I'm not worried about that. But the half which talks about when you're allowed to be Mechal Shabbos, when you're not allowed to be Mechal Shabbos, that's critical. I told the boys that did smicha by me. I told them, if you're not going to know your basa b'cholav, fine. But if you're not going to know Refuah on Shabbos, you're in big trouble. That you got to know. First of all, something is wrong with you if you don't know it. And second, something is wrong with me. It's like the rabbi who doesn't teach is also at fault. So I'll try to see if we have enough time. I'll try to cover a bit of both, but I want to focus more on the, like I said, on the pikuach nefesh aspect. There are really 7 stages, 7 madregas, 7 levels of people that are not well or sick people in this halacha. If you look through Shulchan Aruch carefully, Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch specifically, you see there's 7 different levels. We'll probably think of the same exact thing, but I'm dividing one of them into 2. There's, in the booklets that you guys have, it's divided to 6 levels. Oh, great. Okay. Pretty good. I'm just going to add you a 7th one. There's somebody who, what we call chayla sheyesh b'sakana, somebody who's sick and is a danger. That itself is divided to 2 categories. Chayla mamtin, chayla she'ena mamtin. A person who's in a dangerous situation, but you can wait. Or no, you can't wait. There's an urge to get into something right now. I'm not going to go into the specifics. They're pretty similar, these 2 situations. One is you can wait till after Shabbos, well, you can't wait till after Shabbos, but they're both in a state of sakanas nefashos. The next level under that is, and that there's no question, everybody knows you're supposed to be Mechal Shabbos. The Alter Rebbe brings 2 opinions whether getting the goy is okay or getting the goy is not okay. And the Alter Rebbe says, no, getting goy is not okay. And those places that have the minhag to get a goy, they have to make an announcement that the reason they're getting a guy is because the guy is conveniently available. So no one should think that you have to definitely get a guy next time and go look for a guy when it's not conveniently available. The best is not to get a guy, and people should know, there's nothing with Shabbos with the Yid, perfectly fine. On the contrary, better to do with the Yid. It's actually wrong to do with the guy. And the only solution, if you want to do with the guy, is to make that kind of announcement.
What does it mean that you could wait?
The person says a lot of people that unfortunately have medical conditions, but there's nothing urgent that has to be done on Shabbos. It can be done after Shabbos. Person goes to the doctor. The doctor says he needs to go through a surgery. It's sakanas nefashos mamish. But the surgery is scheduled for 3 months from now.
What's it going to have to do in the whole house?
I didn't say I'm not going to help. I said, but that's a condition of but there's no sense of urgency. Now, then there's the next level under that is what we call, before we go further, I'm just going to mention one comment. Maybe we'll come back to this, maybe not. Now, Alter Rebbe also brings 2 opinions whether to do a shinui or not a shinui. The Alter Rebbe, when it comes to the 2 opinions whether to use a goy or not to use a goy, he's very clear, don't use a goy. But shinui, he doesn't come at the conclusion. It is my opinion that it's the same answer. I know other people say differently. Same way you shouldn't be using a goy, you shouldn't do a shinui either. For the sheyesh b'sakana. Because, sorry? Sheyesh b'sakana. Yeah, b'sakana. You shouldn't use it for the same reason. You're going to be using a shinui, people will think they have to do a shinui. And therefore, sometimes a shinui will delay the process. By the way, driving with a shinui is the biggest sakana nefashos you can think of. So, Some might want to drive with the shini, and that creates a lot of sakanas nefashos. Anyhow, it's not recommended to drive with the shini, especially people that are not used to driving with the shini. The next level after Chedesh Tefillah is what we call sakanas ever. Sakanas ever means when there's an organ of the person, a limb or an organ which is in danger. There's some danger to that.
Is there a difference between if it's in or out? I mean, in the danger to a limb that's in the body.
Makes sense.
Any age?
Any age. Now, on the contrary, the eye may be more serious than other Eivarim, more than a regular Eivar. According to the Chachma Shloima, it's not mainstream halacha. He says a danger to the eye is like sakanas nefashos. But fine, but I'm correct. So the problem is the sakanas Eivar halacha is a yid is allowed to do with chal Shabbos, and only allowed to do with the rabbanon, not a deraisa. The problem is today's doctors have a very hard time defining something to be sakanas Eivar and not sakanas nefashos. Because typically, most cases of sakanas Eivar, doctors will say there's a danger to the entire body. If there's a concern that there's something's going to go wrong with the part of the body, then there's a general medical concern. You might be able to find some isolated situation. I'll give you a couple of examples, but generally, if there's a problem that his hand is broken, infection, it's always linked with something with the entire body.
Why separate them?
So I'm saying today's day and age we don't have that distinction, but there is a broader definition of sakanas Eivar, and the broader definition might help you see examples of something today's day and age which could be sakanas Eivar, not sakanas nefashos. For example, Poskim say sakanas Eivar does not only mean that the Eivar will be lost, that the Eivar will be weak and won't be able to function normally the way this Eivar normally functions. That's also sakanas Eivar. A woman, if you don't give her medication, she won't be able to become pregnant. That's sakanas Eivar. Where's the Eivar? Which Eivar? Eivarei ha'ilada. The organs that give birth. That's a form of sakanas Eivar. In fact, there's a big discussion in Poskim. A person who has difficulty doing the mitzvah with his wife. So there's people that go through all these different types of treatments, and often they're involved Shabbos of Chilul Shabbos, and they haven't had kids for who knows how many years. A person without kids is called a chayla. You would say no, right? It's a serious situation. A person that have kids at 15 years didn't have kids. Is that called sakanas nefashos? So one of the ways how the creative solutions that Rabbanim have come up with to allow for room for different hatadim for a person who's childless, that itself is sakanas Eivar. The person's Eivar of being able to give birth, take Viagra and Shabbos the Mashal. So that is a sakanas Eivar because he won't be able to give birth. Another way to say this, heter, they use it differently. They talk about the emotional distress could create sakana. They talk about the fact that it's a mitzvah. It's not family food. It's done for a mitzvah. So what I'm trying to say here that sakanas Eivar isn't just in the sakanas Eivar is a bit broader than what we think it is. And then the thing that which I think is extremely important is a category called chayla she'ein b'sakana.
What is psychological?
Sorry?
Psychological issues.
Psychological conditions could be chayla she'ein b'sakana. In fact, usually it would be more in that range.
Not having children for a long time.
That's right. So not having children a long time is not necessarily a psychological condition that could create maybe a psychological condition. We have to be careful not to abuse this too much either. But a person who is anorexic, suicidal, people that have these kind of conditions, those are sakanas nefashos situations. Chilul Shabbos all the way. There's not even a question about it. Now, there's people that are suicidal this level, and then people that are, they've had some thought of suicide. I don't know if there's anybody that lived in today's day and age and doesn't have a thought of suicide should get himself checked out by a doctor if something's wrong with him. But thoughts, everybody has thoughts. The question is how serious it is. Are they on a suicide watch? They're on a suicide watch? Yeah, then it's a serious thing. So, so emotional sicknesses are included. But I want to talk more about chayla she'ein b'sakana. But before I go to that, let me go through all the 7 madrigas, and then I want to give a very important clarification here. Caveat. This Chalash Yesh B'Sakana, it's urgent, not urgent. Chalash Ein B'Sakana. Sorry, Sakana Sever. Chalash Ein B'Sakana. There are 2 types of Chalash Ein B'Sakana. I'll talk about that in a second. There's Sar Godel, Miktsas Choli, partially sick. And then it's something called Mechesh Ba'alma, just an ache.
Discomfort?
Yeah, a bit of discomfort. One of the difficult things in all these things are, I could give you a name of a condition, and they could be any one of those 7. Fever.
Yeah.
High fever.
Right.
High fever could be sakana, and it could be all the way in the bottom of Mechesh Ba'alma, just a bit of toothache. Toothache could be Mechesh Ba'alma, and toothache could sometimes be really mamish. Extreme toothache could be mamish. The Rebbe was told in Tavshin Lamed Ches, the Rebbe did not want to take medication for the pain. The Rebbe was agreeable to everything else, but if it's for the pain, he doesn't want to take that. He's not taking medication on Shabbos Yom Tov for the pain. The logic, I mean, I'm trying to explain the Rebbe, not necessarily the Rebbe needs my explanation over here. Pain, whatever, that's manageable. That's not sakana. The doctor told the Rebbe the intensity of the pain is endangering the Rebbe's life, so the Rebbe agreed. Now, there's the pain per se, and there's the danger that can result due to the pain. So a toothache could be very serious. The person has to have a bit of, a sense, what we call the 5th chelik Shulchan Aruch. A bit of brains. In halach, we have a concept called hefsim merubah. That certain things are allowed because it's a tremendous loss. So we'll learn now Shabbos, but when you learn kashrus, basta b'cholov, is a heter, often you say that if it's a great loss, then there's room to permit. How do you define great loss? There's no number. There's no number on it. And the lashon of poskim is hakol lefira ois eine hamoira. It's all as defined by the person who's giving the psak. He looks at the situation and says, come on, this is hefsim merubah. And for a poor person, this is hefsim merubah. And for a rich person, that's hefsim merubah. And for a company, that's a whole different way of looking at things. You need to have a cook, a way to look at things. Now, here also, sometimes you need the ois eine hamoira. You need to find, is this a fever which is sakanas nefashos? Or is this a fever which is... The only difference is here, you will become the Meir. When it comes to a question of kashrus, you need to ask the Rav. When it comes to sakanas nefashos, you have to make that determination. If you don't know, then you go up a level, not down a level. You say this is sakanas nefashos. Let me take the example of fever. So let me talk about that for a second. The Moshe Feinstein wrote a massive chiddush, and a lot of people were very troubled by what he wrote, but he held by that. He said, 102 fevers, sakanas nefashos. And even 101, you could be lenient to. Now, contemporary poskim challenged him and argued with him. And today's day and age, we know that there's no rule about how much fever it is. The doctor will tell you. Fever, why does a person have fever? Fever is a symptom of fever. Fever is not even the problem. Is the fever going up the whole time, or it's going down? Is it a little kid, or of extremely old person, or middle of the road? Is it with an infection or without an infection? Is there a lot of pain? What is going along with it? The fact that a person has, let's go back to the Shlomo Zalman's rule that I said in the beginning. Is it something that's urgent during the week? So he has 102 fever, okay, he has 102 fever, whatever. Everything is fine. And sometimes, oh my gosh, 102, 103, 104, okay, it's getting serious. So I'm saying you need to use what would you do if this clinic is not open? Would you go to the hospital during the week? There was a Chassidish Rebbe, passed away a couple of years ago, that was very critical about Salah. He's not the only one. There was one Rav in America that was extremely critical about Salah, and he felt a new thing with doing, can people walk around with walkie-talkies on Shabbos and all of that, this whole thing, and he was against it until one time the need in his family, one of his kids, and he changed his whole entire attitude to Hatzalah. There was a Rebbe over here in America, and he told his Chassidim his Chassidim have a problem with Hatzalah. And he says people abuse the system, and it's true. I know this from Hatzalah drivers, and they tell me the kind of calls they get. Never mind, they abuse Hatzalah during the week also. It's not only a Shabbos thing, with all kind of crazy things that really it's not a kind of thing you should call it. Something which is not something which requires Hatzalah.
You get the phone call on the phone, right?
So they have no choice. They get a phone call, they have to respond because they don't know. Right? So they have to come. I have right across the street of where I live, there's a very tall, extremely high apartment building. I don't know, 20 floors or something. And every day there's an ambulance there. It's not Hatzalah, there's a bunch of guys that live there. Every day, more than once a day, because there's some senior citizens that on their caller ID, the first phone calls to the ambulance, doesn't matter what. They come, it's nothing, and they go back. Yeah, I don't know, I don't know. Okay, some people don't even have an ability to, it's sometimes a mental thing also. There's some people that call the Rav for every single thing, and it's not a shaila. And some people call the doctor for every single thing, and it's not a question, right? So, you got to try. Oh, I was talking about this Rebbe. So this Rebbe came this thing, hey, you can't call Hatzalah, people call Hatzalah, I have a tooth, they call Hatzalah, you call Hatzalah for. So, in the end, he put in the following rule. He said, anything they would be willing to pay $1,000 for it during the week, only for that you're allowed to call Hatzalah. If you would be willing to spend $1,000. Every time you call Hatzalah on Shabbos, it's $1,000. If you say, nah, $1,000, okay, maybe I shouldn't call, then you shouldn't call. And I have to say, he's wrong. Because there are people, unfortunately, which are in sakanas and fashion situations, and they will not call because it's $1,000. And it's $1,000, they'll start thinking. And that's a wrong way of calculating, whether you should call or not. I had a condition once for one of my children. And my sister, he was in yeshiva, and it was Tainus Esther, and he wasn't feeling well. It was Tainus Esther Mugdim. Tainus Esther Mugdim, meaning Tainus Esther wasn't on a Thursday. Purim was on Sunday. Tainus Esther was not postponed, but brought earlier the Thursday. So Tainus Esther is the lowest level of fast that we have in Halakha. It's only a minute. It's not one of the 4 official fasts. It's Yom Kippur, then it's Tisha B'Av, then it's all the other fasts, and then it's Tainus Esther. Tainus Esther Nitcha, Tainus Esther Mugdim, is even less than anything. Even a small thing. And he was really not well, and I told him, calling for me, I told him, don't fast. This is another example where people get their priorities messed up. It just happened to my son, but anyhow, don't fast. Anyhow, since I have a lot of sons, no one's going to know who it is. Anyhow, so, okay. He didn't listen to me. Unbeknown to me, he didn't listen to me. He's not going to fast, come on. He fasted. They were off for Shabbos, and they came home for Shabbos. Purim, Shabbos is Erev Purim, right? Not Shabbos is Purim. Friday by the meal, he's in extreme pain, like crazy. He's screaming from pain. He doesn't know what, something's hurting him. Yeah. And this is the kind of kid that never screams, even when he's in pain. Everything is fine, everything is fine. You know those kind of kids? You have to prod him and urge him to go to a doctor because really, it's fine. He doesn't want to upset anybody around him, right? I could see the guys in crazy pain. I didn't know what to do. I called someone that lived across the street from me. He says, I think this is he thinks something. I don't even know what this is. I wouldn't have a clue what this is. Something over here in the stomach or something. So the person is a nurse or something. I said, should I call Hatzalah? You're the Rav. I said, I'm the Rav, I just don't know what this is. Anyhow, I'll call Hatzalah. That's what I did. If I don't know, I don't know. I'm not taking any chances. Call Hatzalah. They said they think it might be appendicitis. Took him to the hospital, and we were there the whole Friday night. And he's in pain. The pain went up, went down, subsided. Okay, the CAT scans, X-rays. Don't ask you. Once you go to the hospital, you're under their care, and I don't know. You have to find the person's shoe size and his grandmother's shoe size, and everything has to be checked out from top to bottom. But fine. Next morning, Shabbos Zacher. I escaped from the hospital, found some shul where I could hear Parsha Zacher. But he was in the hospital, whatever. And it wasn't, you see, he's a patient. He can just do whatever he wants. He would love to do that. There was a minute in the hospital, but that wasn't shaykh. He missed it because he had to do some tests. And he missed Shabbos, fine. And we were dismissed from the hospital. Everything was fine. Don't know what it was. Everything is fine. I told him later, let's see, Shabbos is a deraisa. That is a minig. Then says the mugdum is certain. If you're not feeling well, for sure you don't have to fast. But you decide to fast, I assess it because you ended up missing a Pasha Zach, which is a deraisa. You have to think how to evaluate things. Like I said, I found this little seichel. So going back to this, to the principle of Pekuach Nefesh, fever, toothache, you can evaluate based on the condition. You can say, look, listen, this looks like it's more in the sakana mode. I don't know, I'm not taking any chances. That's just an egg. So going back to our categories, I said that there's two types of chayla she'ein sakana. We said it's chayla she'yesh b'sakana, it's sakanas aver, and then it's called chayla she'ein b'sakana. Chayla she'ein b'sakana, the Alter Rebbe defines it, other places, is nafal mishkav, literally translated, bedridden. The other one is chola kol gufay. His entire body is sick. Now, the Alter Rebbe is the massive chiddush about chola she'ein b'sakana. What is he allowed to do? He's allowed to go to Michal Shabbos for sure, no problem. He's allowed to even do a deraisa. Normally, by the way, when you're not allowed to ask a guy to do malach if you're on Shabbos. And when we are allowed to ask a guy to do things, it's only based on two things. Number one, it has to be only the Rabbanan. And number two, only in limited conditions. If the guy is doing a Rabbanan, we call it a shvus de shvus, a double whammy. Getting a guy to the Rabbanan, and the guy is only doing the Rabbanan, shvus de shvus, and he's doing it for a mitzvah, he's doing it for a great need, great loss, minor sickness, mitzvahs chayli. An exception to the rule where you can get a guy to do even a deraisa is chayla she'ein b'sakana, not mixas chayla, but chayla. He's fully sick. What's called chayla she'ein b'sakana? Like I said, either he's bedridden, or chalka, his entire body is sick.
Chayla she'ein b'sakana is like a guy that's like maybe.
So I'm going to give you some examples. What you also allowed to do, there's no problem taking medication on Shabbos for that. So the Kol Gufa is allowed to take medication. The Isra on taking medication does not apply to him. And the big chiddush, which is the Alter Rebbe says Mishnah Berurah does not say this. So you're going to check other books which follow Mishnah Berurah. They're not going to tell you this secret. The Alter Rebbe says a chayla she'ein b'sakana is allowed to do even a deraisa, provided he does a shinui. He makes a change when he does it. Now this is extreme. Why is this extreme? First of all, what's a chayla she'ein b'sakana? A child is a chayla she'ein b'sakana. Tzarchei katan k'chayla she'ein b'sakana. Needs of a child are considered like a chayla she'ein b'sakana. Now, that doesn't mean you let it go put an Uncle Moshe for a child on Shabbos. Because with the shinu, yeah? Put an Uncle Moshe allowed after the rice. It's only the Rabbanan. So even if it means the rice with the shinu, I'll do it. No. Tzarchei means tzarchei katan. Obviously, it doesn't mean you can just do whatever you want. So, I use this example many, many times, but you can think of your own examples. I mean, there was a situation where a kid was asked to shiur, the kid is having difficulty breathing, and he's wheezing. You have to put on a nebulizer, you know, those things with water, those machines. And I asked me, you can put it on for his child on Shabbos. I said, yes, no problem, just make a shinui, it's fine. Shabbos, really? I said, hello, your child is a chayla even if you would be well. It's a little kid. When a child needs something, he's considered a chayla. On top of that, he's also wheezing, so he's not going to well. What's the question about? So, and whenever a person asks me a question, the house was that, yeah, sure. The guy's not, of course, it's a chayla. He's definitely a chayla she'ein b'sakana. Most likely, he's much more than that, right? The person has chayla she'ein b'sakana. But I'll take it a step further. Here's my grandfather, Olav Shalom, that being in bed does not mean the guy has to be laying in bed. The person that's supposed to be in bed is also called chayla she'ein b'sakana. I'll take it a step further. A person that doesn't go to work. Now, I have to be careful how to define this. Some people don't go to work. Never. They hardly show up to work. There was a Maggid shiur that they wanted to fire, and the Manal said, I can't fire him because I never see him to fire him. I want to tell him that he's fired, but I never see him. So I'm not talking about people who never show up to work. Normally I'm talking about people that are workaholics, and it doesn't matter, the guy could be having 105 fever and still show up at work. But there are people that under normal conditions, they wouldn't go to work because they're not feeling well. They miss a day of work, miss a salary because they're not feeling well. That not feeling well is called chayla she'ein b'sakana. He's generally, in simple English, he's generally sick. There's no danger in anyone's life, but he's generally sick. It's not a localized pain. Generally, chola kol gufa, his entire body is sick, or it's not both. It's either that or nafla mishkav, he has to be in bed. Now, like Pesachim say, modern day Pesachim, some people will not miss shul on Shabbos because they have a good chinuch, and they know you don't go to shul. Maybe after the person not go to shul. So they'll go to shul. How can I not take my kids to shul? What are my kids going to do? What kind of Shabbos is that? But he's the etzem in bed. He's just going to shul. A guy told me that he had 103 fever. And his grandfather was a tamim from Amol. His grandfather was a Bukharish tamim, but he was a tamim from Bukhara. And he said he didn't go to shul Shabbos morning. His grandfather said, why don't you go to shul? He's 103 fever, he's out. And therefore, what's the connection? So, what do you mean you don't go to shul? Just tell me, if you would have to go to the doctor, you would go? Yes, baby, go to the doctor's appointment. And why is shul any less than a doctor's appointment? So, there's a famous word, Bevesel Kivna Halach Beragesh the Rosh Tevis. We basically give the halach in the shul, we go Beragesh with a lot of emotion, with a lot of noise. Beragesh Tevis, Barad, Ruach, Geshem, Shelig. When it comes to going to shul, we go, doesn't matter if there's hail, wind, rain, snow. Shul, you always go. That's an attitude. That doesn't change the person's condition. The person's condition is called chayla she'ein b'sakana. He would not go to work under normal circumstances. That's called a chayla. He doesn't have to fast. I'm not talking about Kippur. I'm talking about regular fast. The person's a chayla. It's part of a fasting. What's called a chayla? He's sick in bed. That's called a chayla. That's the definition of a chayla. Sometimes a person puts an extra effort, but if not for his effort, he would be in bed. But it's not only chayla she'ein b'sakana. If the guy will become a chayla she'ein b'sakana, if he doesn't do anything, he might become a chayla she'ein b'sakana. Even if he will become a chayla she'ein b'sakana during the week, he's treated now just like by pekuach nefesh. Chayla she'yesh b'sakana. You don't wait. You say, if you don't do X, the guy's going to be sakana nefeshos. So it's already considered sakana nefeshos. Same way, if we don't do X, he will become a chayla. So that's also already considered a chayla. No, that's two different things. That's talking about a person. This person has a condition that might make him into a chayla. If there's no existing condition, nothing exists. If a person has a condition right now, if we don't do anything, he'll be sick in bed. That's good. So there is a situation. When I talk about the future, I meant something else. In the future, one day, this will come for good use for us, and we'll be able to deal and cure the world. That's a whole different story. Obviously, Pesachim extended the chayla she'ein b'sakana a bit further. They extended to people who can't find the shidduch because of that. They extended to other scenarios, in other words, which are serious. A person who can't function normally because he has mental issues. You know, it's not limited to, and again, I'm not talking about mental issues which could be sakana. There's mental issues which could be sakana, like I said, suicidal, all that. But the person, because of his emotional condition, mental condition, can't function like a normal person. That could also be a chayla she'ein b'sakana. When I mentioned before that a child is considered like a chayla she'ein b'sakana, I didn't give an age. And there's a range of ages mentioned in Pesachim. And I'll just to confuse you a bit, just for fun, I'll give you the range. There are those that say anybody under bar mitzvah, and there are those that say no, only up to 2 years old. And then there's those that say 3, 5, 6, 9. And the truth is, it's the principle here is the same principle again. You need to really assess the situation. For some things, up to 12 years old is considered chayla she'ein b'sakana, and for other things, no, come on. He doesn't really need that. it depends on the condition. Let me give you an example. The halacha is that on Shabbos, if a child is locked in a room, you're allowed to break the door on Shabbos because the child will be scared. Now, let me clarify that, qualify. If you have an adult who's scared, you're allowed to break the door. So that's another thing, by the way. People that are much older, much senior citizens, sometimes also consider sakana just because of their age. Yeah, but besides from that, we said a child is stuck, you're allowed to break the door. So, why? Because of the fear. So I'm asking you, if an adult is stuck behind the door and he's scared, are you allowed to break the door? Sure, you're allowed to break the door. The same sakana. The difference is that an adult normally is not scared. A child is normally scared. Now you'll have a child that's a 12-year-old and he's having a fun time in the bathroom. He locked himself in the bathroom. He's having a fun time. Didn't finish all the books that he took to the bathroom. So that's not a sakana. In other words, it's not a clear, science. Child, sakana. On the other hand, like I said, you can have adults that are also scared. Generally, a child is considered chedesh sakana. For certain things, it's younger children. For certain things, it's older children. Depends how important this is. In relation to the child's age, and the child's level, and child's personality. They say there's different types of people. There's people that are made out of glass, and people made of. There's certain people, you say one thing to them, they get all offended about who knows what, and everything. And they're shalom bayis. There's in a certain style. Their employee-employee relationship is a certain style. They're the kind of kids that do abuse when they were younger. And what was the abuse when they were younger? And therefore they have scars. Because the teacher once said something in class. Right? You have such kind of people. Now you walk by a door. So naturally, if you're walking by a glass door, you're much more careful. And walking by a regular door, a wooden door, you just walk like that. Certain people are made out of glass. They can function in society. They're just made differently. Okay. On some levels, they're higher functioning than everybody else. So it's just, there's certain personalities. So the same thing we're talking about over here, the needs of the person, that depends also on what kind of person we're talking about. If there's an emotional fear, yeah, the same as a child fear. If something can happen to the person due to the fears, we're talking about extreme fear, obviously. Right? Either they lose something themselves, or the emotional condition could be traumatic for him. Right? People go through trauma. Right? Stress, trauma. These are all real things. You don't need a Shulchan Aruch to go tell you that. This could be traumatic for the person. That could be a sakana. What trauma does to people. Let me. I said I wanted to touch a bit about. There's so much to talk about this, but let me touch a bit about the sugya of medicine on Shabbos. So the reason why Chazal made a rule that you can't take medication on Shabbos. Oh, I didn't go through all of that. I don't think we'll be able to. Yeah, but I think you guys have done it in the officially in the curriculum. Whatever. I could, but I can't do everything. I passed the sakana stage, so I'm much more comfortable now. And let me talk very briefly about medication Shabbos. Why did Chazal make a rule you can't take medication on Shabbos? Because people are very, when it comes to Refuah, people are other bahul al Refuah. So a person feels a sense of urgency. It's like, I don't know. A person does things which he wouldn't normally do because he can't handle it, because he's not feeling well. Even though he's not necessarily chedesh, yes, but it's not even a chedesh sakana. He's in pain, he has an ache, whatever. But that sense of urgency, men especially, the woman will tell you. And they're not feeling, big deal. I go through this every day, the woman will tell you. So, look at childbirth, right? Like the men say, what's the hardest thing about childbirth? The men have it much harder, right? Because the women at least get to lie down. The man has to stand the whole time, right? Like the men say, I have to watch a woman going through pain. She doesn't have to do that. So men have it much harder, because they're what we spoke about before. It's the makeup of the person, how much he can handle pain, and how much he can handle things that bother him. But because a person is bothered about his Refuah. Therefore, the Chazal are concerned if you let a person take medication on Shabbos, he'll go and grind. And he'll go grind herbs and make medication. And grinding herbs is a malacha that I have taken. That's the reason why I can't take medication. They made a rule you can't do any refuah. Once you can't do refuah, you won't do anything because you just can't do refuah at all on Shabbos. Because refuah is outlawed. That's basically the principle. But one of the big questions is nobody goes grinds herbs today. I can't say nobody, but it's not done. Today you just go to the pharmacy and you buy. Nobody does that. So the first person that raised this question was, I think he's the first, maybe he's the second, Elubavitch Rav, Rabbi Braun Chaim Nah, and he alerted people to the fact that today's day and age, maybe this Gzeira is not applicable anymore. Now, could be, it's an argument. The response to that is, there are still a few people that still go and do grind herbs. They're all the naturalists that make their own remedies and herbs. There's people that do homeopathic and all kind of other kind of remedies. There's still those few people, number one. And number two, was Chazal make a Gzeira. We can't just dismiss the Gzeira because the situation doesn't exist. There's a lot of Gzeiras that Chazal made. We might just throw them all out. Sometimes we do dismiss, say that's not practical today, and sometimes we don't. And there's rules about that. But it makes the whole Easter much more lenient. And if every time there's a shiur, a Rav will tell you, anyhow, it's Bisman Hazeh, there's no real Gzeira. And on top of that, okay, if you're allowed to. So it pushes that one notch. So one of the various Tatum that exists in terms of the Refuah and Shabbos, first of all, there's something called Ma'achal B'riyim. Anything which is healthy people eat is not considered Refuah. Because healthy is part of regular diet for healthy people. The joke goes that today all Briim are crank. All healthy people are sick. So one of the issues that people talk about is nutrients, vitamins. Are vitamins a refuah or not? And there's a lot of reasons why vitamins, this is a big, heavy-duty debate. I could tell you a number of reasons why they would not be. Practically, somebody has to take vitamins, so big deal. Take one before Shabbos, one after Shabbos. Like it's not. Some people think it's like religiously, if you take the vitamin every single day. If you can't, it's not the end of the world. First of all, a lot of the vitamins are substitutes for food. That's what they really are. It's an iron pill. So you can take meat. Instead of taking meat, I'll give you taking a pill. It's more practical. Today's age, people are not going to go make themselves cut up their food in such a way that you get X amount of vitamin this, next amount of vitamin that, and vitamin D and E and B. I want to eat my potato chips and crackers I always ate. Okay, I'll take a few pills to supplement. So, but it's instead of food. That's one argument. Second thing is today's day and age where everybody keeps tons of vitamins in the house. You want to still call it refuah? It's mamash ma'achal b'riyim. Everybody takes vitamins. Everybody takes vitamins, has it in the house available. So there's a lot of good reasons why vitamins might not be considered refuah. Still, it's a machlokas. If it's best not to take it on Shabbos. I heard from the people that the Friedrich Rebbe was makel when it came to painkillers, and he allowed people to take painkillers on Shabbos for headache, for things like that, without a problem. Like Advil, aspirin, Tylenol, no problem. And a lot of Rabbanim are very makel about that. I don't know if it's because they say this is called Ma'achal B'riyim. Whatever, it's like I said, Tylenol. Tylenol today is not like Tylenol. Painkillers, I'm always at a four. Today it's like some people just take this on a regular basis. Or because they claim that headaches is not considered pain, is not considered a sickness. It's only refuah now doing which is not a refuah, it's not a refuah. I don't know whether, or because generally they were more makel with medicine today. But this I've heard from the Mukachu was very makel. I heard it, like I said, the name of the Friedrich Rebbe also. Remember that I said that the Rebbe didn't want to take painkillers on Shabbos, but that's not Tylenol. That was talking about medication, because serious medication. By the way, this is another example. Pain is another example. One of the things that could, migraines, headaches. Headaches could be mechush balma. It's a minor ache. You can't do anything on Shabbos for that. Could be tsar gadol. Could be mixed chayli. Could be chayli shei b'sakana. And it could even be chayli shei b'sakana. Migraine. There's some migraines that are extremely severe. Then there's also nothing, whatever. The person that's in it will know, will know what it is. One of the other Tatum about Refuah, we'll stop right here because I'm going over time, I noticed. Mix the pill, mix the medication with food before Shabbos. That's a shini, that's a hecker. When the person does that, then they'll remember not to grind on Shabbos. So it's already mixed into their food. Another heter which was given, and again, all these are Tatum, maybe you can argue with them, since the general Isser is not so serious today's day and age anymore. Another heter is, if you already started a course of medicine before Shabbos. And there's two reasons for that. Either, there's a few ways that explain it. Either once you start before you already have a hecker, or something that you take over a course of many days is already a sickness, a chazal not geyser. Chazal geyser, person doing medication on Shabbos. Or something you take over a couple days is already normally already question of sakanas nefashos.
The doctor tells you you have to listen. The doctor tells you take antibiotics for 7 days.
Antibiotics especially, see, one of the reasons, because we live in a much better society today in this area, we don't realize antibiotics is really sakanas nefashos. What happens is that our treatment as such is like when people are unfortunately dying during COVID, the real horrible days, some people say it's not sakanas nefashos, it's nothing, it's not. And Shulchan Aruch is the definition of what's called a dever, what's called a plague. And there's numbers there that X amount of people out of X amount of people have to die in order for it to be considered a plague. But some was saying, okay, it's not that amount of people. What they didn't realize is why is it not that amount of people? Because we have oxygen tanks, we have all those things that didn't have as much like a mother, right? We have all these treatments that we can do for people. But this situation is a kind of situation. We have things that we can do, and now we can count. We try this, and we put them on this machine and that machine, and eventually it came back to life. That's really it. It doesn't take away from antibiotics. Is really dealing with an infection, which could be quite dangerous. So be'etzem, it's not sakanas nefashos in action, but different. Certainly, medicine should be taken for that. Another thing about two more things about Refuah and Shabbos. Something which you can do through herbs. You're doing something, but you don't use herbs for that. Exercise, for example. Doctor says you have to go exercise. So there might be other problems with exercising on Shabbos. I'm talking about from the Refuah aspect. It's not something that's done through herbs. So Chazal acid Refuah, the only acid Refuah are things that you normally use herbs. And if it tells you, I don't care if you're going to grind it out, we don't let you do it. Something you would normally not use herbs anyhow for that, you just have to exercise with that. That's not included. Or, I said I didn't want to talk about the concept of exercise. This prat of Refuah Shabbos does not apply. It's not a problem of Refuah. I said I'm not going to discuss it. I want to focus. Anything that you do to prevent sickness is also not included in Refuah. Refuah is to cure, not to prevent. And that's another one of the reasons why a lot of poskim say vitamins are okay. Another reason, vitamins are not to cure. Vitamins are to prevent problems from happening later. And yet we do have to wrap up because it is getting late. All of this that we're learning right now is not going to be relevant very, very soon, but it's going to be a fascinating subject of discussion when Mashiach comes, all about how people were cured, what sickness was. We're going to be in a world which is devoid of sickness completely. The ultimate refuah, which is a lot of happening even on Shabbos, but we don't have to wait for Shabbos. It can happen Thursday night too. The ultimate refuah is the coming of Mashiach, may it take place speedily nowadays. What's the story with Maidu? What's the bottom line? Let's see what's happening with Maidu. Otherwise, I have to.